Let's get started, shall we? Hi everyone. My name is Nicholas. I'm probably already that. But welcome to the Artists Now Visiting Artist Series. This is our first presentation of the spring semester. So we are rolling. So what I tend to do is, before turning it over to the instructor or the student who is introducing our guests, I tend to hype up the next visiting artist talk, which is next week. So join us next week, will you? For James Haywood Rawling Jr. Same time, next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. And the other thing is, whenever there's an Artist Now talk, it is a public auditorium. It's free and open to the public. That means everyone on the UWM campus and everyone in the community. So please join us. You may or may not know a couple things about this series. There's a class that's held in conjunction with it that I teach. That's Art 105, 309/509. That's the academic component of this course. So we have students from all across the campus, different disciplines in this classroom. And this is perhaps their first visiting artist that they've heard, maybe ever, or certainly for this semester. So the way it usually shakes out is the artist presents for an hour or so. It's up to the artist if they want to take questions during. Typically the artist takes questions at the end. And we usually have a fascinating 15 minutes dialogue, or sometimes longer, question and answer series. When the artist is done, what I do is invite you folks to come up and personally meet the artist and ask any follow-up questions for the next 15 minutes while my class takes a break. And then my class comes back after the 15-minute break and we resume up until 9:30. So that will be the pattern all semester long. Each guest is coming from different mediums, different parts of the world, different perspectives, and it's always really fascinating to see what happens. The last thing I want to add is this program, the Artist Now program, came from students. This is a student-derived program. It's amazing. It came out of the Black and Gold Committee, came out of differential tuition. So students 5+ years ago really asked and wanted one of the best visiting artist series that they could possibly get. And they delivered, and the faculty delivered. So the faculty, two faculty representatives, look over the Artist Now series. They take suggestions for new visiting artists for each semester. We're already working on, a year from now, our programming. So if you want to learn more about Artists Now, you want to spread the word, if you want to come in future semesters, please look up the website. Simply go to the Peck School of the Arts and look up Artists Now. You'll see the whole calendar. You'll see bios for the artists, and you'll see you'll see what's coming up. So please join us all semester long. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Molly, who will introduce our guest.
All right, can everyone hear me? Pretty good. So, hello, my name is Molly Keysweater. I am the treasurer of Object, which is the jewelry and metalsmithing organization here at UW Milwaukee. Before I introduce the artist tonight, Gustav Reyes, I just want to highlight a couple of things coming up this semester with us. On April 19th, the annual Kenilworth Open Studios will be taking place from 11 to 2 p.m. This is a great day for all the arts at UWM, highlighting the current work being made here. Make sure to check out Object-sponsored events. April 23rd through the 26th, a group of faculty and metal students will be attending SNAG, the Society of North American Goldsmiths Annual Conference in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I would like to thank the Artist Lecture Series as well as Object members for bringing in our visiting artist, Gustav Reyes. He's been talking with advanced metals classes and critiquing with the graduate students, and has been a great experience. Gustav Reyes is a Chicago-based artist who explores nature's beauty. He combines wood and metal into wearable jewelry. He studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, as well as Chicago Bauhaus Academy, where he developed an understanding of and appreciation for architectural woodworking and the finer aspects of woodworking. He has been published in numerous metalsmithing and art jewelry magazines. His work has been shown extensively throughout the United States as well as internationally. Gustav has a company under his name and a second company called Simply Wood Rings, which is growing popularity with the eco-conscious jewelry buyer. Please join me in welcoming Gustav Reyes.
Forgot my password there. Can you hear me? Yes? Good? Okay, good. Again, my name is Gustav Reyes. Thank you for having me here. Thanks to Michael Bernard for kind of like corralling me and coaxing me and encouraging me to do this. Thanks to the faculty for also doing the same. And this is the first time I've ever done anything like this. So if I'm nervous and you catch that, please, I know you'll understand. I'm going to play a little video that I played a couple of times today, just so you can kind of get a feeling for, you know, like a little bit of background before I kind of start off. So I'll start that now. Wood is something that I feel is precious. Metal, stones are these permanent things. And wood is this part of life that goes away. As humans, we connect with it at a visceral level. The scraps, I think, are the gems, and the things that are discarded are really important. For me, it feeds us, it cleans our air, it heats our homes, it actually makes our homes. It's part of the human experience. I choose wood and I incorporate wood into my rings because it just feels really right. Why shouldn't it be as precious as anything we take from the earth? I view trees as the gems of nature. I grew up in Chicago, and it's influenced a lot of my work in a real visceral way, in a way that, a big major city like Chicago can only do. My father allowed us to do the things that we like to do. The creative things that he made kind of allowed us to kind of be free and open, and wood was at the center of it. I worked in construction, but the life I had wasn't fulfilling this creative urge inside of me. It felt like I was living somebody else's life. On my journey to find something to create, my wife came to me and asked me if I could make a wooden ring. I kind of dismissed it quickly because if you drill a hole into a wood, it'll collapse on itself. As a woodworker, you're told that the world is flat, but it clicked in my head that if you get it thin enough, you can roll it on itself, and that's how the rings came to be. Wood comes to me for the rings from anywhere and everywhere. Even when we're in an urban environment, you have nature creeping through at every corner. Like the Allianthus tree, it's made its way into the United States, and you'll see it in fences and growing out of foundations. This tree that's going to live, it's going to seek out life. To me, it symbolizes the American immigrant experience. Some of the really interesting wood comes from musical instruments. It's kind of beyond just the material, it's that life that the instrument had and now is imbued into this wood.
makes it that much more meaningful. Wood is ephemeral, and it will not last forever. It's a little bit different than what a traditional wedding ring symbolizes. To acknowledge the cycles of life, to acknowledge that it will decay and it'll go back into the earth. Creating an object that embodies that with the material in its totality is what really draws me to the work. One of the best things about my job is creating something that brings couples together. That's really meaningful to see them come into the shop and talk to them and really connect with them on a human level. It's really humbling to kind of be a small part of their relationship and kind of make it that much more joyful.
It is so beautiful. It's really nice.
When I'm in the shop, it lowers my blood pressure, it keeps me in tune. I've always had a connection with wood. As a child, seeing my dad express his creative side was really important for me. He kind of showed us that it's a noble material, it's a noble way of working. The tree's precious. It should be lauded and respected for what it is and what it's done for us. It's really exciting to see that my sons kind of see that in me and see me expressing it. So yeah, it has come full circle. All colors are equal.
So as at the end you saw you saw the words Dark Rye. That was a production company that Whole Foods owns, and they kind of asked me if I wanted to have this video done. So it was, I don't know how many thousands of dollars of production value that they just kind of said, here, we want to tell your story. They've done that with, I think, 20 other artists. So they have an online magazine that features different makers, people in the food industry, in different walks of life, kind of doing it on their own terms with the web. And you should check them out. It's darkride.com, and I think they're doing really cool stuff. It's fun. Some of the stuff's are some of the videos are really kind of funny and hilarious. Some of them are really serious too. But if you get a chance, they also have on the web. They have a question and answer kind of thing. So they wrote up a whole essay on my work, and there's a lot more background there. But I thought I'd show that just to show a little bit of background on me. I gotta get this keynote started. And give me 1 second. Here we go. Oops, sorry. I knew this was going to start at the beginning. While I was busy making, I came across an article in the New York Times about a flute that was 43,000 years old, made from bone vulture. And I thought, hey, there's a guy making just like me. Imagine this guy sitting around the campfire, sucking the bone marrow out of this thing. It makes a sound that he's never heard before. Over the years, it evolves into this flute. Around the campfire, this guy plays this flute, and he's the Google, and he's the Apple of his time. This flute evolved over thousands of years from one maker to the next, and it was made from a found object. The simple act of turning to the people around you pushes you to create. I was making traditional woodworking objects and items in different boxes and furnitures when I found Etsy, and I learned more about e-commerce. and learned about the power of the web. That the power that the web held for makers like me. And I do admit that it's a different animal now than it was at that time. My first object was a wooden ring, and it was featured on Etsy. In fact, it was Etsy's first wooden ring ever. And it doesn't look like much, but it's a piece of wood, and it was a piece of veneer that was my found object. It was that thing that was laying around that I kind of turned into something new. I moved on to create my own website in 2007 called Simply Wood Rings, 2 years after I found Etsy. I believe creativity doesn't stop at the studio door. The website allowed me to connect with people. One of the people I connected with was a young marine biologist. She asked if I could make a ring from trash that she collected floating in the ocean to make her a wedding ring. In her work, she studied the effects of this trash on the marine environment. I learned then I was making more than wedding rings. I was connecting with people and helping them tell their stories. Roughly 4,500 beautiful stories. But that wasn't enough. I wanted more. I wanted to take the work to different places. So while doing a show in an abandoned swimming pool in Brooklyn, a woman came to me and talked to me about the Philadelphia Museum Craft Show. I later learned it was one of the best craft shows in the country. So what I did is made 5 rings, took 5 images, and I got in. It changed everything for me. It opened my eyes to new people and new ideas. With my work, I hope to express the idea of human nature. I hope to say something about people and how we exist in the natural world. My first curator was my mother, and I remember running to her with my latest drawing. She was always encouraging and supportive. I was hooked on this exchange. The simple act of turning to people around you and showing your work is one of the greatest tools we have as creators. I believe that it's this connection, driven by our biology and who we are as humans, to take part in this dialogue and helps us become relevant. Sometimes it's just getting the work out and letting the work happen. I'm clearly happy to say more with less, and I think the wood is saying enough. To me, it would be like gilding the lily. The simple bending of the wood allows for a radical reduction in waste by up to as much as 80%. I like the idea that the work is with us when we need it, but then we'll go back to nature when we don't need it. Much of the work is based on intersections, both physical and non-physical, that we as humans experience. I try to keep my metal to a minimum only because wood speaks to me more. And I like the idea of bringing structure to the surface using traditional woodworking techniques. This brooch was created using a 3D printer and a curved walnut piece that was made by hand. And I like the idea of creating something by hand and machine that would not otherwise be possible. So, all right, this lamp is a couple of years old already. It has LEDs inlaid to the top portion of the lamp. And I believe that the lamp should add to the room when it's not serving as a lamp. And I like the idea of allowing people to kind of have sculpture in their house. Not everybody has podiums in their homes. This is a table. It's approximately white oak, or it's approximately 2 inches of white oak. It's been hand bent at room temperature using a cold bend process. And the cold bend process allows the wood to stay flexible for up to 4 months. I used the circular bends to break away from the traditional 4-leg stretcher design. Each piece intersects at 90 degrees
This design is worked out first in CAD, then it's modeled to get the balance right. And the top glass is patterned off the famous Noguchi coffee table. This is my beautiful wife. And she's at the Museum of Art and Design in New York, where we exhibited the work recently. And in the photo, you can see her wearing a brooch. And this brooch was recently acquired by the museum's permanent collection. I wasn't expecting that, and I'm happy for that. And over the years, I've worked to take my work to places that reflect how I feel about nature and humans interacting with it. I hope the work I create can contribute to the dialogue of the makers. Thank you. So if there's any questions, we can kind of get there. I thank you for I can let the slide loop if you guys got any questions. That's how I usually handle it.
Well, you're way too interesting to let you leave. So, we usually have folks present to about 8:10, 8:15. So either tell us some stories about your life or your work, or let's hear from the folks and see where it takes us.
Okay.
Your work's amazing.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear more about the necklace piece that you had on the wood. Specifically, hear more about the idea of bentwood, what that's about.
The bentwood is a newer work for me, and it's using a technology that was developed just recently, so it's about 14 or 15 years old, this bending process. It's actually changing the cell structure of the wood. If you think of the cell being a tubular structure, now imagine while the thing is steamed, a machine compressing the structure of the cell, this tube, against the grain, so horizontally, and it folds the cell wall. Think of the straw that the kids drink out of, that bendy portion. Now imagine every cell in the wood folded that way from like a 10-foot board. It's all folded on itself. At that point, when you bend a piece of wood, at the top portion it kind of unfolds, and at the bottom of the wood it kind of contracts and folds on itself. And that's what's flexible for up to 4 months after this compression process of the wood. And it's as long as, the way I look at it is like bread. As long as I keep it wrapped and the moisture content kept up, I can kind of flex this wood. As time goes on, it gets kind of more difficult, and it becomes, I can't make jewelry out of it. I can make like tables and lamps out of it. But it's just an amazing process that I had known about for about 6 years and couldn't get my hands on it, for a couple of years after I knew about it. And once I got my hands on it, because it was after the Simply Wood Rings thing, the stuff that I developed for Simply Wood Rings. And it was just amazing to be able to push material around almost as if it was wire. And I had days to kind of push it around, and once it solidifies, that piece, the bent piece, is as strong as if it was the straight board. And it's just, as a woodworker, you're working with something that you can't run through the table saw anymore. So you got to, like, the idea that you have to develop new tools and new ways of thinking about this material. It's exciting to kind of be there, but the tool to compress this, there's only 5 that exist in the world, only 1 in the United States, and it's in Washington State. And it was meant for large industry, for big beams. Some of the work that Frank Gehry has done with his bent, his flowing buildings, a lot of the wood that is bent in his buildings is this machine produced. And all the work you see that I've made from this is almost just a cast-offs from that process. And I like the idea of reusing something with minimal waste, because like the bracelet, this idea that doesn't have to be turned, you're not losing 80% of that material in the turning process. I'm only losing about 2% because it's a thin strip that I bend into that shape. So it's really, to me, it's something that it's really so efficient and a nice use of material, and then it just goes back into the earth. It doesn't even want to ask for recognition. It wants to be amazing while it's here, and then it just goes away. And I like that. I like not having to leave homage to myself or the work. It kind of has to be and then just go.
but the bending is fun. Every day I get up in the morning and think, okay, what can I do? How can I push this stuff? Some of the simplest shapes, just that knot is you know, the basic, a little kid could do that with a piece of string. And some of these gotta get a little more complex with the metal work, but that structure, that's a really strong piece of wood. It's not brittle, it's not fragile. It kind of defies what you think of doing, the materials doing. Anybody else? Yes.
Before you had access to like the cast off that stuff, like where did you first start with like your wood rings? Like how did you before you had all your equipment? Like
It started literally from that piece of veneer. I was in my shop, and I had this, 5 horsepower unisaw. I got these giant machines, and I need to make things. And the idea of me making cabinets and kind of following the trade and the industry didn't appeal to me. So it was this, my wife came to me and asked, can you make a wooden ring? And I drilling a hole in a piece of wood and realizing that you get it thin enough, it's going to collapse on itself. I kind of dismissed that process. But at that time, I was searching for something to create, and I was doing boxes and different things. But this simple, she let me sit a couple of days. I think she had it figured out, and then came and gave me the answer. And it was just simply, she took a piece of paper, she asked me a couple of questions, like, can wood do this? Can wood? So she learned the limitations, like, in a couple of days from me. And then she just took a piece of paper and started rolling it on her finger. And it clicked in my head that if you get that veneer for the wooden rings thin enough, you can roll it on itself, and then it's got a structure, it's a tubular structure, almost like a piece of plywood wrapped on itself. So it's that, the grain running around the ring that makes it so strong. And people, the question that I get asked the most about those rings is, how durable are they? And I put them on, and I bang my hand on the table as hard as I can, and I had to stop. My hand hurt too much. Nothing happened to the ring. Those are my tests, but the tests are those 4,500 rings, roughly, that are out there in the world, that every once in a while, I do free refinishing with those rings, and I tell every customer, as long as they're willing to live with the material, I'm willing to help support them, live with it and own it and appreciate it. And a lot of people understand that the work is not here forever. It's not about, I'm not trying to sell them the future or the past. It's about living in the present moment and understanding that we're fragile, and that's something that is, it just aligns. For me, it's a very reassuring and comforting thing that it's almost just a really honest approach to the material and not asking more from it. I don't know if that helps. Anybody else? Yes.
I was wondering, and you kind of answered a little bit of it, I guess, just now, but when you make the rings, because veneer, I was thinking, is like such a floppy, sort of flimsy wood, you obviously layer that several times. Do you usually use different types of wood for different layers? Does it turn out to be a pretty solid piece when it's not on your finger?
Yeah, they're pretty. I think I put in my pocket when I wash my hands, but they're really. They take on, because of that layering process, they take on a really nice durability that I wasn't even expecting, to happen at such a small scale. But it's like that plywood. When you start kind of crossing the grain and layering it, it gets a durability that I think it's enough. I think it's enough of a product that, or enough of an object that most people that purchase them they don't even believe that they can kind of wear them every day. And once they start living with them, it becomes something that is, it's just comfortable, and they people forget about. But that layering is the key with the glue is the key that maintains the structure there. And yeah, they do look fragile, but they hold up. I'm one of these guys that overbuilds things, and I want them really thick. Or when they build a cabinet, I kind of stabilize it. I started with the craftsmanship of furniture. I mean, it's solid oak stuff that was you can't destroy it, lasts forever. And these rings kind of, they defy my understanding of the process, which is kind of cool. Anybody else? Yes.
Can you just give us a story of you say you have thousands of stories or whatever of weddings and stuff and rings. Can you just give us an insight onto how you go about making those rings and how you make them personal, I guess, to the person?
Oh, okay. And that's, on Etsy, I learned that I was answering emails and communicating. It's a really personal interaction. It's not something that I produce a lot of material or blanks, or they're one-offs. Everyone has to be done by hand. There's not a casting process. I mean, there's a little process that I've kind of developed to kind of speed up some of it, but it's the stories that people come to me with. It's their wood. Some people, it's like, I remember having a couple where the bench, they had their first kiss. They sent me the wood from that bench. So it's this idea that it's meaningful to them. It may not be much of a wood. People are sometimes embarrassed to bring me these things, but it's their lives. It's what makes their lives tick. It makes them, the thing that's really fun is how two people come together and they bring these elements and put them together into a ring. That's the thing, like, you know, the dirt from, you know, from Arizona combined with, like, you know, parts of a brick from New York, and how that kind of makes a relationship kind of more meaningful to these. Most of the couples are really young that buy the work, and I can't get over every day. It's like a new story. And some of the sadder ones are rings and for people that pass away and things like that, and like babies that pass away, and like the families are paying tribute. Some of that kind of work gets, you know, a little more personal and sensitive, but I can't, you know, I love it all. It's one of these things that I'm driven by the making of it, the wood and the materiality, but if I didn't have that story, I didn't have that connection, I don't think I could just make rings or make wooden rings, and, you know, something that's durable that people live with. So I don't know if that answers. Anybody else? Let's go way over here.
Do you have a favorite kind of wood that you like to use, or is there a kind of wood that doesn't work at all for this?
There's lots of woods that don't work. The woods that don't work are the opposite of what you thought. What people would think is these like ironwoods or ebonies, the really strong woods. Those become more brittle and they can't bend. They don't lend themselves to the bending process. The woods that are like in the middle of flexibility, they have a nice tensile strength, but they got a flexibility. And rosewood is one of those woods. And I came across like a 2,000 or 1,000-ton stash of it that a gentleman collected in Chicago. There was a company that made xylophones for like 30 or 40 years in Chicago, and that company's closed. When this guy worked there, he collected these cutoffs of these xylophones, and they make xylophones in the marimbas. And it's rosewood from South America. It's endangered. You can't even touch the tree anymore. And for me, I kind of I didn't like the idea of using something that was endangered, but I didn't want it to go to a landfill. And for me to use it for people that kind of that resonates with is a very noble use of something that would, you know, we take advantage of this wood, you know, for what it provides to us. But I kind of felt that that's my favorite wood in terms of durability, flexibility, and just salvaging something that would have ended up in a landfill. Yes?
Can you talk about the timing of the process, like how long it takes to soak the wood and how long it takes to dry it, and from start to finish, how long it takes for that process?
The process, if I did it like in one go for one ring, it's the milling of the wood, and it can be, if it's from green, I gotta dry it, and that takes a little bit longer because I'll get couples that'll send green wood. And then I gotta dry it. And because of the thickness, I can dry it quickly in the kiln. And I mean, I can do a couple of rings in a day in that process, but because the wrapping process, it's gotta stay in the kiln for at least a day to dry totally out and for the glue to cure. And then you gotta climatize it, you gotta stable it back into the environment that it's gonna be in. So like 2 days, the process, over 2 days, you can do a full ring and get it finished. The handling time is not a lot, but it's like cooking. Sometimes some processes of cooking are longer just because you gotta let it marinate or do that kind of thing. So it's not just like a one-step process that you're dealing with. So at least a day or two to complete a ring. But I'm on like an 8-week delivery schedule. Just it allows me the flexibility and time it allows me enough time to produce the rings the orders I got now, and then the future orders, and so I mean I think about 2 days is to be able to make one ring to finish. Yes.
Will you talk a little bit more about like the fabrication process between hand making something with like digital fabrication included? Like what drove you to start planning things through CAD and digital, like 3D printing, and combine those two between like your handmade pieces?
I think it's the geek in me. It's like the nerd that wants to kind of see these machines be a part of. I grew up at the very beginning of computers to this day. I see that technology is something that can help us and push craft and production work further. But I like the idea of taking technology in hand and kind of merging, kind of like the piece that you saw there with 3D print. That curved piece is introduced during the printing process. So in the design, I got to kind of render that open space, that curve in the 3D model, and then place it in there, and then continue the printing process. It's this idea that you come to a different place that you couldn't reach without the technology and the hand. I'm always I get that 3D printer running, and I want to start shoving my hand in there and like kind of introducing material while the printing process is running, just to be able to kind of like make with the thing, as opposed to like having it spit out an object at me. So my brother comes to the studio and sees all this equipment that I have. I have seen a couple of CNC machines that work in 4 axes that I'm buying these things because I like them, and then I figure out ways to introduce them into the work because I get excited by them. And it's not that I need that stuff, it's that I like to play at the same time that I'm making work. And he complains that I like all the stuff you like, how do you get to use it? He's a coder, he goes to work and he hates his job, but he comes and plays and he helps me fix my problems. And it's not much different than when we sat at a Commodore 64 and we kind of sat there for an hour writing code just because we wanted to see a ball move across the screen. And that was it. There was nothing else. And we got excited doing that. And I'm not doing much different now. We're just playing in the process. That's my answer. I don't get a lot into 3D modeling. I have assistants that kind of from IIT that kind of know what they're doing in that realm. I'll do some drawings and we'll talk back and forth. We work on a lot of the 3D model problems ahead of time, and then we kind of figure it out in the real world, and it kind of works. Go ahead, you have a question?
Yeah, could you expand upon the design that you used for the craft show in Philadelphia? Because those rings look a lot different than engagement rings.
Yeah, that's an interesting story for me because I made these 5 rings. I approached things really clinically, and like I studied the show. I saw what everybody was making. I know how the photographs look. I know what you think about the people that are jurying. So I made my work. I did my rings, and those are very different than simply wood rings because they all had stories. One of them is based off of the key. I don't know if you can see it. It's the key that Noguchi uses in his tables when wood wants to split apart. He would put this key in there to keep it from splitting. So that was my homage to that furniture aspect of it. And that was some of the rosewood that I used. And I devised these things, applied, got in, and then ended up doing the show. And by the time the show came around, I found this crazy bentwood stuff and started bending it. And I got to the show and I presented that. And I felt like I tricked them. Like I did these rings, and here I come with this, and it threw everybody off at the show. I thought people were looking at me sideways because they weren't getting the bentwood stuff at the time. And I don't even think they would have gotten the wood, sculptural rings, but the bentwood really threw some of the older curators and older people just because they didn't know what was happening. They didn't know what was going on. But Yeah, they are different, and I still do some of that sculptural work, and there's people that come to the shows and they want to see the sculptural work, and, you know, it's something that I kind of move on more quicker than what the public kind of really sees when you put the work out there. They are different, they are me, but they're just a different aspect, and it's something that I can kind of go back to in the future, and it becomes part of the repertoire.
Why do you have two different companies?
I have because at first I wanted to make Simply Wood Rings this like higher end art, and I had trouble doing that. I had trouble kind of like figuring that out in my own brain, and I didn't have to get rid of Simply Wood because it was what it was to the age group. And I think those kids, the younger kids that buy that work, I mean, they've been buying it for 10 years now, and it hasn't been going away. And the Gustav Reyes work is the older version of those same kids. They're looking at life very similarly. They're looking at, to me, I see that they're very similar. They're just at different stages in their life. So the work is kind of, it feeds me differently. It feeds my, it feeds, like I want to push the boundaries. And I think Simply Wood Rings is still a part of me, and I consider it like my day job that supports my more like pushing the boundaries, creative kind of work. That's why I have.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're doing, like marketing, you've got two different demographics that you're appealing to, you're working with a very traditional material, but you're into all this techie stuff, and a lot of times woodworkers are kind of Luddites and very traditional people, but you've got to be known in the field, so are you catching some flack from other woodworkers? Are they like, why are you using all these kind of like corporate tricks? You know, why do you want to make a living off of this instead of just making furniture?
Don't make a living and make furniture.
How does that go? What's your interaction like with other people that are making art out of wood?
I think that started from like day one. I remember putting the first ring on Etsy, and then, because I would put a ring in jewelry and in woodworking, and people got mad. They were like, how can he get away with this? And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's both. And it's straddling that kind of two worlds that upset people at the very beginning. And even now, to this day, people are like, does he do jewelry? He's a metalsmith? And I'm comfortable with it. That doesn't bother me. And I think kind of what we're getting at is like the commerce side of it. I resolve that with people, and myself more importantly, that one of the stories I like to tell is the baker and the potter. And it's, think of the flute maker, think of that time, these prehistoric people just doing an exchange. And it's this idea of the potter kind of exchanging with the baker his wares, and it was about survival. That exchange was not about $1 or how much something cost. It was, they needed to do this exchange at a very primal kind of survival way. And I bring that into my work today. I bring it into, when I'm working with a lawyer or a doctor, that his life energy that he spends making or doing what he does, he's exchanging it with me for a lamp or for a bracelet for his wife. And the life energy that I put into the work, I look at it as an even exchange. The price point is what it is. Everybody understands that. And then when I do Simply Wood Rings and I get a couple that says, look, my budget is $100, that's all I can afford. That's the exchange. It's not about, and when the ring is $500, I charge them $100. Because for me, it's about that exchange. It's an honest exchange. And I'm not losing in that process. So I can kind of go up or down and move. And I think people will say, look, you're not charging enough. But it's enough. It's enough for me to continue to have assistance in the shop. It's enough for me to pay, school for my kids and do what I need to do and grow the business. And I think that's how I resolve the business, like commercial side of it. The marketing, the pushing the work out there, you have to. If you don't, the world is not going to come to you and look in my cabinets and look in my, I gotta get the work out to the world, and it just, I feel as urgent. If I continually push it out there, it gets in front of the right people. Yes.
You seem very aware of the fact that you're working with a very natural material, and that even some of the wood you're dealing with is facing a scarcity issue, and there's that identity of nature in the work. Does any of the work that you do identify those boundaries, or push those boundaries, or pay respect to the limitedness or the environmental concerns that surround your work?
Yes, and just by the fact that I'm reusing repurposed material and never like store-bought material to kind of produce things. And I had a dilemma with this rosewood, because I didn't want to take something that was already scarce and kind of put it in front of everybody and say, hey, look at this rosewood, it's so great. You know, I'm the only guy in the world that has 40 years history of hardwood. I got every color imaginable sitting in my shop. And there's not many people that can say that. And I had the dilemma is like, do I do that, or do I just tuck it away or throw it away? And for me, it's like, if I don't do it, I'm not doing that wood service. I'm not doing the natural process service. And then allowing people to kind of, that love that material, to kind of have it. There's a couple of other ways that I'm just trying to remember the question a little bit.
Do you create work where the work identifies with where it comes from, with the wood identifying the place?
Yeah, there's a wood that I hooked onto that had a lot of meaning at the very beginning. I talk about it in the video a little bit. It's called Alianthus. It's a wood that was brought over from the Orient as a decorative plant. This thing sat in front of these houses from the late 1800s to like the early 1910 of the last century. And it was put there, it was like this exotic plant from the Orient. Little did they know that this plant puts out a chemical and kills everything around itself and kind of like takes over. And now this thing is considered an invasive species. I kind of mentioned it, but the way I learned about it, I did a show in Detroit, and somebody said, hey, have you heard of ghetto palm? And that kind of, it's this, everybody has an experience with this wood. It grows in urban areas, it grows in blighted areas, it grows, you'll see it in an abandoned parking lot or abandoned buildings growing out of fences. And I grew up with this thing. I remember picking, some of the branches and taking the leaves off, and it was like a stick that kids would hit themselves with it. But it smelled very bad, and we called it stinkweed. My wife grew up in Chicago in a different neighborhood, and in their neighborhood, they used it to, the adults used it to reprimand their kids. She grew up in a primarily African-American neighborhood, so for me, it's not minority, it's her favorite book is called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and that tree is Alianthus. It's a story that was written in like 1930s about this tree. There was the Germans and the Irish kind of she was telling her story through this tree, how they had a rough life, but it was this tree that grew like palms in the middle of a concrete jungle in Brooklyn. So for me, it's different people's involvement with this tree, different people's stories, and it's a way that kind of unifies us and makes lots of different people, that have traveled the path in the United States similar. Yes.
In the clip, you mentioned that your father helped your creativity grow. Could you expand on that?
Yep. He would have been up here doing exactly what I'm doing, and my family tells me, your dad would have wanted to do what you're doing. He grew up at a time that he had limitations from the family, from the environment, from whatever, that kind of held him back. He was a carpenter, he did labor work, but after school he would take us to different community centers in Chicago, and he was doing metalsmithing and casting, and this was the mid-70s, this is after work, he's tired and he's taking us, he would put us in one room where the artists were painting. They just give us like this newsprint and we were drawing and just experiencing things. And he was doing what he loved to do after hours. And to me, that, you know, he worked hard to kind of provide for us, but then he still wanted to do, you know, he wanted to push his creative side. Metalsmithing is something I never picked up from him. He passed when I was like 11 years old. So I got enough from him to kind of just, I mean, by the time I was 35, I couldn't continue working and living the life I had. That's what I mentioned in the video. It's this, you have to be the person you've got to be. And I told one of the classes earlier today that before that kind of changed in me, I created drama, I created problems. My mind was causing those problems to kind of have something to work on. And since I've kind of found, my wife has helped me kind of find my passion, go back to it, I've been able to kind of not create those dramas and not create those problems, but focus that on the work itself, and it's made all the difference. And my dad kind of was there, and you know, I can see him working, and my family kind of tells me he would have been doing the same thing. He would have been right there with me. Yes.
What's the farthest away from home your wood has taken you? You said you've been to Philadelphia, and the nice lady at the beginning said that you've been all across America and even abroad. So where have you gone with your work?
I probably could have gone further than I have, but I hold myself back in terms of traveling. But you know, I've done shows in San Francisco a few times, New York just recently. We've done multiple shows. That first swimming pool show, it was an abandoned swimming pool, like in, I think, Greenpoint or something. McCarran Park Pool. It was this hipster, like, it rained all day, we got all dirty, and the woman I talked about in the video was the curator from the Philadelphia Museum show. I never talked to her, I never seen her. She came to my wife and said, here's a business card. She kind of looked at the work, and that experience, just the fact that I looked at her business card and I Googled what she did, who she was, that experience opened up my eyes to another world. It's like, what are these people making and stuff? And that's where I like kind of set out to get into that show. And I got in, and I don't know if she juried that year, but when she saw me there, the work was very different than what she saw me for in, because she saw the Simply Wood rings that I was selling to hipsters in Brooklyn. And that was at a time, like in 2006 and 7, that there was this craft movement that was happening that, I mean, everybody's aware of, that I hope that everybody's aware of, that kind of, for me, started it, and I kind of got in early on that part of it. Then I put my head down, and then I pick it up, and then, you know, it's like everybody's telling me about Etsy, and everybody's telling me about wooden rings, and, but I forgot the question, I'm sorry.
The farthest you've gone. What's the farthest you've gone?
Farthest? I don't, that's still yet to be determined, but I think San Francisco, New York, I've done shows in Baltimore. Yeah, I've done the Smithsonian show in DC, and some of these encounters with people that they have histories of doing craft for, I mean, since craft, like the contemporary craft started, and I'm talking to people that have been in the fields and collectors, and I'm talking the way I'm talking to you, and I'm energized about it, and they've been hearing these stories. It's nice to, there was a lady at the Smithsonian, one of the shows I met, she was going through a rough time, and we sat there, and, like, in the middle of the show for about an hour, we talked. I didn't know she was gonna have, like, brain cancer and surgery really soon. So we got really deep into our conversation, and then she came back the next year, and she had a wrap around her head, and I don't know if she even remembered that we had that conversation, but it was like maybe 3 years later, and then she had remembered everything, and it was just really nice to be forced to be there with somebody kind of during that rough time, and she let out a lot of emotion to me, but then she forgot it for a couple of shows. So I think those, emotionally, I've gone to the end of the world and back, and have enjoyed it. Anybody? Yes? Yeah.
Has being between in this great space of art and craft helped you or hurt you?
I think it's helped. A side of me doesn't want to be like this artist, and a part of me doesn't want to be like a craft artist, or somewhere, you know, like a hybrid in between. And I respect both, and I think, to be honest, that there's like the boundary is kind of fuzzy, and I don't really kind of identify with like titles like that. Like Michael kept calling me an artist, and it took me a long time to even identify with that kind of thing, because I felt myself as a maker and kind of getting things done and pushing the work out into the world. And I don't think it's hurt or helped. I kind of like, you know, let that happen. For me, it's about positioning like the GR work where, like I said in my talk earlier, my mother was the first curator, and when that piece just got accepted last October into the Museum of Art and Design in New York, it was a shock. But that curator that was there has seen some of the best work, and Michael knows, and she curated some of the best work. And that dialogue that I had with my mother and this curator is really no different. It's like pushing and feeling like you're a kid again, that you're doing things for the first time. It's the same feeling. And when I'm feeling like that, it's life affirming. It's like when you get your crayons and you're a kid and you do this drawing, and it's like you realize, and later you realize, okay, a lot of kids have been through that experience, but you're experiencing those materials for the first time. And when you work with wood and bend it, I felt like I was experiencing these materials for the first time and pushing them into ways that, you know, the world has never seen that before. And I get excited by kind of adding to just a little bit to that dialogue. Yes.
Earlier today, you talked about the gems that you include in your work, and when it came to diamonds specifically, you talked about your preference in lab-grown diamonds. I think you talked about why that's a preference for you.
First, let's back up a little bit. Earlier, you said if I was nervous, and I said yes, I was nervous. But all right, yeah. To me, stones, I would rather use a lab-grown stone, mainly because if we can create something, the idea of purity and that we pull out of the earth is something that we imbue into it. And why can't we imbue something that's man-made with that same kind of, you know, reverence or that? I mean, we can make pure stones just as comparable. The stones that I used are called moissanites, and they have to have laser etched. You can't see it unless you're looking through a loop. A serial number engraved into that stone so that it can be passed off as a diamond. And for me, the idea of using something that's blingy in contrast to wood is a cool kind of, it's got a nice vibration. It's this like raw, you know, wood against a diamond. I think that's been a good seller. And I think because of the stone, but all the wood, without the two, you wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't be able to kind of sell as many of those. And I hope it's not just the blingy stone. I hope it's the wood and the stone that are kind of doing the dance there.
You make that choice for ethical reasons too?
Yeah, and it's easy for me just to like make the choice and then just not, you know, go back for any reason. And for some of the GR work, I'll use gold, and it's got to be salvaged, it's got to be recycled, and I try to use the gold sparingly and more as not the main part of the gold, or the main part of the work, but as like a fastener, or almost relegated to secondary status. But it's there. It's like, look, if you want to look at that rivet as something being really cool of it, part of it, that's your choice. And like galleries, they want to push the price up of things, and I think it's easy to do it if you put gold and diamonds on some of the work. And you know, I can find ways to put, you know, string on there, but it's whether, you know, it's whether it's going to translate with customers, and even whether I'm going to feel comfortable even looking at something with that on there. And I got a lot of work in the shop that's in drawers that looks horrible. It's like, it's so bad that I wouldn't let anybody kind of even stare at it for too long. But you got to go through that to get to realize what, you know, you like and what resonates. I have been attached to pieces that I feel like more difficult letting go, but that's when the price goes up. So that's easily resolved. But, and then my wife, I make limited edition series, so the bracelets you see are all numbered inside. She gets all the number ones, and that's cool. But I told the class earlier today, all the number ones look all funky and wanky, and so she's getting the number ones, but they're not the best things. So she can get into prototypes and the originals, but there's a price to pay for it. Yeah, making something for my wife has always been a difficult thing. When we were younger, and she was with me through a lot of the painting, I did painting, and I could paint, and people said I could paint. It just was really hard to put myself through that. I didn't like it as much, but I was good at it, I guess. And she'd say, why don't you ever paint a picture of me? It's like that. I can't make her a piece of jewelry that is for her because there's not enough material that could say what I want to say.
Could you explain, I think you mentioned show a lot, and what you might be referencing is different than what a lot of the students might know as a show. So, I mean, when you're in contemporary craft or jewelry, there's this ominous thing called the show circuit. Could you explain what that is and how that's different than like putting on a show in a gallery space?
Yeah. The show circuit, from what I understand, is usually 10 by 10 spaces, rented out, or you pay for your booth space. All of the shows I kind of apply to are juried, so there's some level of like, you have to breathe and show your work and know that you made it by hand. It's a little bit more strict. So I try to shoot for the top shows, and I've been able to do most of those. The out-of-country shows or like the shows abroad are a little different. But in the United States, they're 10 by 10 square, that you bring your work, you set up your booth, and you present yourself. And you could, like I'm doing today, you stand in this 10 by 10 square, and a person walks in, and you start moving, and talking, and doing things, and when you ease into it. But when I'm in that little booth, it's fun. They're coming to see the work, and sometimes I can talk people's ear off and tell. At the very beginning, I ask them, do you want to hear the long version or the short version? And they pick, and then I go that way. But those shows are a way that independent creators can kind of get their craft work, and painter, like fine artists can get their work out into different, in front of different people. One of the shows that I've done are the Philly Museum show, the Smithsonian, the Baltimore, like the ACC, the American Craft Council shows. And I try to just stick to that. Because Simply Wood Rings does demand a lot of my time, I'll just spend time at those shows. And it's been beneficial, not just in sales, but all these magazine articles, everything that's come out of, that has come from that just me getting the work in front of these people. And one of the things that I've never done it before, but it's like an internet kind of thing where you buy the URL search engine, not the search engine, but you buy the keywords of the people that you want to communicate with. So I would buy curators, and I never did this before, but you would buy the curator's name for MoMA, or for this, or for that, because you know they're Googling themselves. He's sitting there Googling himself, and then you pop up, and you write a letter to that person, and you talk directly to them. And I've always wanted to do that, just haven't had the cojones to kind of do it. But it's there in the back of my mind to kind of reach out. It's a really cool, creative way of doing it. But your work has to be there, or else they're going to think you're a psycho.
And you're selling at this venue.
Yeah, you're selling and talking and promoting, and there's like higher end people and people all over the spectrum, and you have to put yourself where you want to be and present the work professionally and kind of talk without mumbling too much.
Do you think, you mentioned earlier that trade, like the potter and the baker you know, and they're not making something for themselves, but they're making a product and they're sharing it with the world, and, you know, they're thinking about making something more than just what they think is cool. So did that background, and maybe you can talk about that, did that help you get to that point?
Yeah, that background, I started, by the time I was 35, I decided I have to be myself and do the work that I love to do. But it didn't just like, hey, I get up in the morning at 35 and start doing it. I planned, and I was working this other job. It's a company that I started that did plumbing. My brother was a plumber, and I decided, hey, let's make a plumbing company. My sister got involved. We had a crew. I had, you know, $1 million contracts, and I was project managing these things. And what that taught me is like, you gotta work through it. You're gonna build a building that's like millions of dollars, and you're gonna get a contract, and by the end, it's gonna be standing like this. I've done fire stations, auditoriums, and what that showed me is that you're gonna get to the end of this project. It may not be fun, it may not be all, and most of the time it wasn't, because I was arguing with architects. But the idea that what that showed me is like the perseverance, that work through it kind of thing, and dealing in the commerce part of it. But I was relieved that my exchanges were going to be with like 90-year-old collectors that would rather just give you their checkbook and have me fill it out, and all they do is sign it. That was easier than dealing with an architect that didn't want to pay for 6 months. But it did kind of set me up. It was a little bit different, but I was just relieved to be kind of do. Sometimes I feel like I'm kind of tricking people and like taking the easy way out, but it's still work. You got to get up in the morning every day. You got to show up, and I never thought that I was going to have to deal with so many employees, but it's a part of it that is you have to deal with creatively too. So yeah, that set me up to kind of like the day-to-day accounting and problems and attorneys and all that stuff wasn't as difficult today. Now I got 2 accountants, and I don't like it. That part of it. Any other questions? Okay, one more.
Okay, so you said that your work was especially popular with like younger couples, especially the wedding rings. So do you see this like growing in popularity, like the whole organic jewelry instead of the typical golden rings, silver?
I see that they're originally I thought there was a growth curve and that it would diminish, and I thought by now it would have been over. I can see it plateauing, but I hope that it's something that becomes part of our culture and something that other makers can make, and it changes the meaning of what a ring, wedding ring is. And a lot of it is, the people will have the rings for a few years, and they know that they're going to change and grow, and they'll buy another maker's ring. It might be metal in 5 years or 10 years, but they're understanding of that. And I just hope that it kind of allows people to, not just me, not my work, but all the makers that make wooden rings kind of can continue to sustain themselves through it. And I think that's, from the last time I checked Etsy, there's more wooden rings, and I apologize for all of that on Etsy than I care to even see sometimes. But I think it's cool. I think it's allowed people to do really fun stuff. So that was the last question. I don't know if it answered, but thank you for having me.